So I spent a year convincing myself it was a good idea. And I did. And the first time I went to raise the money, nobody would invest. Nobody would invest.
Please welcome to the stage, Jan Sramek.
Jan Sramek.
Jan Sramek.
Jan Sramek. To build a new city of 400,000 people.
62,000 acres of agricultural land.
California is no longer working for working families.
You remember that moment?
Oh yeah, I remember
deciding...
very well. My wife doesn't let me forget it, that's for sure. I was the only employee of the company for 7 years. It's just sheer brute force of coffee. We've been building cities in America for 250 years. And now suddenly we have the exact perfect number of cities in a state that is missing 3 million houses. It's completely insane. I expected people to be skeptical but open-minded. I did not expect...
Welcome to Is This Working? A show about meaningful work and the messy humans who do it. I'm Connor Demon-Yeoman.
Jan Sramek isn't building an app or a startup. He's trying to build a city, one of the largest, boldest urban projects in modern American history. To be clear, like an actual city with people and buses and jobs. He's raised billions of dollars, bought thousands of acres of land. I can barely manage to keep my house clean, and this guy is building a city. This conversation is about what happens when you scale ambition past any normal limit, the doubt, the resistance, the resilience, and the toll of betting everything on an idea most people can't even imagine.
I've been so excited to chat with you because I see you as a visionary and specifically someone who has been able to take this audacious vision and turn it into reality. So to start, what is your vision?
We are building the next great American city. So California Forever is a company that has, over the last 8 years, acquired about 68,000 acres in a place called Solano County, which is between San Francisco and Sacramento. So we now own over 100 square miles. It's more than twice the size of San Francisco. It's bigger than the city of Seattle or Miami. And what we are proposing to build there is a new city. And it's a city that is trying to solve many problems at once. It's trying to make a dent in the California housing crisis. It's trying to build affordable homes in very old school neighborhoods that mirror many of the most beloved neighborhoods in America. Walkable urbanism, medium density, your kids can walk to school, you and your friends can go have dinner and walk back home. We are also trying to bring back a lot of the industries that used to be in California that have started to leave. And in particular, that is advanced manufacturing and its defense.
I heard you tell this story about growing up in this small Czech village and watching your grandmother literally build your childhood home with her hands. And when you talk about a more optimistic time in America and this vision for a better way of living, a better way of commuting, a better way of interacting, I'm curious how these early experiences in your childhood have influenced where you are today.
I think in two ways. I think the first one is I grew up in a in a place where there was a tremendous amount of respect for skilled physical labor. And so my whole family, my grandma worked in a steel mill and in a quarry. My grandfather worked in a steel mill. My dad is a mechanic. My brother works in construction. My uncles work at CNC machines. And so someone who could actually build a physical object of any kind was very respected. And I think that's something that's been missing in America for the last 20 years. And it's coming back. And I think it's going to be a really good thing for the country. And then the second is opportunity was really rare where I grew up. And so it was people had to really work to earn a living. And it was very rare for people to have many of the luxuries that we take for granted here. And so what was striking to me when I got to California was how much we were screwing it up as a state just by doing basic things like not building enough houses. So that even though there was all of this prosperity, you had people who were making $100,000 a year and they couldn't afford to live here, which to anyone outside of California would seem completely crazy.
I just love this arc so much. This little kid from a small village in the Czech Republic coming to the United States and telling a story of recasting the American dream. I mean, in many ways, there's nothing more emblematic of the American dream than what you are doing.
Oh, 100%. I mean, this is the story of the country, right? And I mean, even there's this whole controversy about building a new city. By the standards of most of the world, every city in America is a new city. I mean, San Francisco is 250 years old.
It's a baby.
It's a baby. And so the idea that people are like, well, the city is a new city. I'm like, San Francisco is one of the oldest cities in California. Most cities in California are like less than 100 years old. I mean, what was the population of, I don't know, Pleasanton 50 years ago? Like 5,000 people. So almost all of these cities are new cities. And suddenly people made this argument, and it's like, so what you're saying is that we've been building cities in the world for 20,000 years. We've been building cities in America for 250 years. And now suddenly we have the exact perfect number of cities, and we should never start another one. Like in this moment in history, in a state that is missing 3 million houses, it's completely insane. And so I think there's a perspective that you can put on the problem, and it helps people see it differently.
Yeah, feel less comfortable with the status quo.
Yeah. And so I remember my girlfriend, now wife, and me moving to San Francisco. And we both had college degrees, and we were both making good money, and we were struggling to pay for a one-bed apartment in Hayes Valley. It was like, how does anyone have family here? How do you have kids? And then as a result of that, what that means is nobody is having kids in these cities, which I think is really sad, because places that don't have kids just kind of fundamentally are not as optimistic, right? I think there's something deeply optimistic and sense of excitement about possibility and the future if you can live in a neighborhood where you walk out and there's a bunch of new life on the street. And San Francisco, I think, has 11% of the population is kids. Even Manhattan is 22%. San Francisco is the worst in the whole country by far.
I want to go back to something you were saying about your process. And it sounded like your process it started with dissonance. It started with friction, some confusion. Why is this not working? How can people live here? But a normal person would, look for job opportunities at different housing organizations, or maybe get involved in public policy. How do you make the jump between identifying a system that is truly batshit crazy? I mean, you and I are both, we live in California, and it is insane how difficult it is to build, how expensive it is to build, how difficult it is to have kids. But how do you go from that to deciding, I want to build a city? Right? How do you make that jump? Because when I experienced it, I just wanted to kind of throw up my hands.
Oh, I did too. So I spent a year looking at the existing cities, and my conclusion was that wouldn't be enough. And then at some point in 2017, I had the thought of, well, maybe you could start from scratch. We clearly are building subdivisions all over California. So what if you build it bigger and better and denser and more walkable, and you brought jobs there? You could actually build a lot more units on the same amount of land, and you could make it really spectacular. And then coincidentally, 4 months before then, I had gone to Solano County to fish on the Sacramento River. And so I drove through the site of where we're building today. And I remember driving through this vast expanse of grazing land that was kind of burned down in the summer. It clearly wasn't orchards. It wasn't hiking. It wasn't a natural park. It seemed like if you're going to build anywhere, this is where you should build. And the scale of it was huge. And so a few months later, when I had the thought of, well, maybe you could build a new city, I thought, well, this would be a really good place to do it. Now, my first reaction was, this is an amazing idea. And then 20 seconds later, my idea was, this is completely batshit crazy, and there's 17 million reasons for why it wouldn't work. And if it was a good idea, someone would have obviously done it, because what does Jan know about building a city, obviously? Then over the next 2 weeks, I went through the process of thinking that it's the best idea ever, or it's an absolutely terrible idea, which, as it turns out, is really bad for your mental health if you change between that 200 times in 2 weeks. And so eventually what I did is I said, well, let me try to prove that it's a bad idea. And I basically wrote down all of the reasons for why it could be a bad idea, which was probably 70 or 100 reasons. And then I spent 8 months trying to prove that it was a bad idea. And so I would list it. Wow. There's a transportation problem. You can't widen the highways. No, actually, it turns out that you can. You can't get rail to the site. Well, actually, it turns out there's an old railroad that goes through the site. You could do it. There's not enough water. No, actually, it turns out that the property has a lot of water rights, and there's water in the aquifer that is not being used. And you could buy additional water from Northern California because it's north of the Delta, so you could bring it there. And so I went through all of those. And then maybe 8 months into it, I was pretty convinced that it would work, but I still thought there must be something that I'm missing. And then I remembered that in one of the books that I read years ago, I was like, well, if it's a good idea, someone must have thought about this before. Like there must be some government plan that looked in the past at what should happen in this area eventually. And I remembered that there was a study called The Future Development of the San Francisco Bay Area that was done by the Commerce Department in 1958 and the Army Corps of Engineers. And it was 1960 through 2020. And so I remember that, and I went and I got a copy of it. I bought it off eBay, and it was the original from 1958, and it was at the time very expensive because not many of them existed. It cost a few $100s. And what it is it's a series of maps. And what they did is they looked at land use in the Bay Area, and they looked at where development should go, given soils and productivity and slopes and earthquake risk and so on. And they mapped it decade by decade. So I opened the first map, and it's 1958 of what it looked like at the time. And Santa Clara hadn't been built, and Silicon Valley hadn't been built, and Pleasanton didn't really exist. It was a very small city. And I'm going through these maps, and you get to 1990, and I see that they correctly predicted, for example, the growth of Pleasanton and Livermore and that whole area. They almost exactly predicted where it would go. And I'm going through it, and I keep looking at this area in Solano County where I thought that we could build. And the whole time it's empty. It's agricultural land. 2000, it's empty. And remember, I'm sitting there in 2016, 2017. And then I opened the 2010 map, and where I thought there should be a city, they had a city.
No
literally where the downtown is today, at the crossing of Highway 12 and what is now Highway 113, which at the time hadn't been built, there's a city exactly where our downtown is today.
That's in Solano.
Yeah. On this, the same geographical coordinates to the mile.
So you're a plagiarist.
Yes, basically. Yes, basically. So number one, it showed me that I wasn't crazy. Number two, that's something that I could go and I could show it to other people who I would need to raise money from, for example, and say, hey, like, it's not just Jan's idea. Like some pretty smart people in the government thought about it a long time ago. Now, obviously, what we are doing is we are dusting off these old plans and trying to breathe a new life into them with building something better and building something different. And what they would have predicted to be built there in the 60s was probably much less dense and kind of a traditional subdivision. And we are trying to build a really different place that is denser and medium density and walkable and much more like Noe Valley or The Mission or Chicago or Brooklyn, better performance and sustainability. But the idea of we should build a city here when we run out of space in the inner Bay Area so that people can actually afford to live here was very much alive in 1958.
Wow. That's incredible. And what a validation.
100%. And I mean, that goes back to your question about what gave you the kind of confidence to do it. And this was one of those things that fortunately existed.
What's so interesting about what you said, though, is that your first response to coming up with the idea was, I want to come up with a list of why this won't work, right? I wanted all the reasons why this idea is not a good one. That's so interesting to me because on the one hand, I see you as this visionary thinker who is deciding to do something that, yes, it's been validated by folks from 70 years ago. Yes, it's not. It is complete common sense that we should be able to do this, and yet it's so hard. And I'm curious, how do you balance that inner skeptic, that inclination of yours to interrogate an idea and say, "Ugh, this is why it might not work. These are the fault lines in my plan," and holding that alongside what I assume is a relentless optimism that I will make this work. Like, what is that like inside your head?
I mean, I think when it comes to the early stage of the idea, it really depends on the nature of the idea. I mean, this building a city there was a very unique kind of a problem in that it was very clear that if you could build it, there was a massive need for it. People would want to live there. Companies would want to locate there. And so kind of, I mean, we
live here in spite of all this.
Yeah, exactly. Right? And I mean, there's people who live on both sides of the property, by the way. The cities on the west side of where we're building are called Suisun and Fairfield. And there are subdivisions that are going up right now on both sides of the property, on that side of the property, where homes are selling for $700,000 to $900,000. And so people clearly want to live there. And then on the other side of it is a smaller town called Rio Vista, and subdivision just went up and they're selling homes for maybe $500,000 to $600,000. And so there's clearly demand, people wanting to live there. And so it was an idea where it was clear that there was demand. What wasn't clear is whether you could build it. And it seemed like one of these if it was a good idea, everyone was going to say it was obvious in hindsight. I think it's different when I worked on some other things in the past where if you have an idea for a new, social media product, I probably wouldn't go through the same exercise of saying, why is this a bad idea? Because it's kind of much less predictable and it's kind of experimentation, whether you can find some expression of the product that really taps into some user behavior that makes sense.
So you just
I think I would just do it. And that's what I did in the past when I worked on those kinds of projects. So I think figuring out the right heuristic and the right approach to how do you assess one of those is really important because different ones work differently for different problems.
I want to go back to that 2-week period where you said it was not good for your mental health. One thing that I find in myself when I'm working on a new idea or a new project, and when there's a lot of uncertainty, I find it very uncomfortable being in that liminal space, that space of uncertainty, of doubt. Do you have a similar orientation towards? I mean, it sounds like that wasn't comfortable, and yet you pushed through it. Is there part of you that enjoys it, and it vacillates between despair and enjoyment? Is it all bad? But just can you walk me through what is your experience of that liminal stage, and how did you persist through what sounded really uncomfortable?
I think it's a really interesting observation. I think it partially depends on where you are in your life, but for me, that period of 2.5 years when I was looking at the problem and thinking about it. In the beginning, it was an interest. Over time, it became clear that I wanted to work on it full time, and it was incredibly exciting and creative and satisfying, and at the same time, incredibly frustrating. Because particularly with something as ambitious and kind of off the beaten path as building a company to do something like this, you always have the thought of am I wasting some of the best years of my life? Am I wasting time? Is this a complete dead end? Is it going to go somewhere?
Have you worried that?
Yeah, a bunch of times I was like, this is fun and I'm interested in it and it's a huge problem and I think I have something unique to contribute to solving it, but is there really a business here, for example? Can you actually do it? Can you actually build something? Can you finance it? Does it make sense? And that, if you spend 2.5 years of your life doing it and all of your friends are like, what are you doing? And why are you not doing this? Why are you not doing that? You're pretty good at that thing. Why don't you go do that? It can be pretty interesting at times.
And how did you push through it? Was it just holding on to the vision?
I think I was just fascinated with the problem and I really cared about it. I think if I tried to spend 2.5 years trying to start a software company to build enterprise software to do integration between some systems, I would have given up in 3 months. But I really found the problem fascinating. Just seeing in my own life the difference between how happy I'm living in a place where you can walk to a coffee shop and you can see your friends in 5 minutes versus living somewhere where you have to drive for 25 minutes to go for dinner. Every time I would experience it when I traveled or when I went to see family or friends, I would be like, no, this makes fundamental difference. And we need more of this in California because it's ridiculous that you can only afford it if you can afford a $5,000 a month apartment in whatever, San Francisco.
Yeah, what I like about that is it sounds like so much of what has pushed you through the difficult times is a genuine, authentic curiosity, which is, it sounds easy, but I think it's really hard for people to find that, to tap into that. I think it requires a real sense of knowing of who I am. This is the thing that really energizes me, and it could fail, it could be successful, but I'm enjoying this journey. This is activating something inside me. And I wonder this sometimes about myself. It's like, do I actually like this thing? Do I think I should like this thing? Is this something that actually my mom said I liked when I was 10 years old? But again, I find that so much of work and innovation and entrepreneurship and doing it for the long haul in a way on energy that really persists, it's about knowing. It's about knowing yourself.
Yeah, and working on different problems and seeing which ones stick, right?
Yeah.
Because sometimes, I think you can't know upfront. You have to get into it and see how interested you are. And do you want to continue pursuing this particular thing? And I've worked on 4, maybe 5 big things in my life, and I found all of them interesting, but to different degrees. And I worked on a software education company before where we decided to commercialize it by selling it to companies to train their employees. I spent 3 years of my life working on it, but I couldn't have spent 8 years of my life doing on it. There was just no way. I found it interesting and I found components of it really interesting, but I was the wrong person to be running that particular company in that particular market. And so I think some of it is figuring out, and some of it you can't tell. I mean, in some cases you discover 6 months into it or a year into it, whether you really care about it as much as you thought you did.
But your experience with this project was you were
it was the opposite.
Activated
it was the opposite.
From the beginning.
Yeah.
And how are you feeling about it today?
Well, now is the fun part. Now we get to do the fun part. Now we get to build it. Or we're getting closer to being able to build it. And so, I spent 7 years acquiring the property. I was the only employee of the company for 7 years. I did everything from entering the receipts into the bookkeeping system all the way through to, buying the property, raising the money, figuring out the designs and so on. And but now the fun part is we're getting closer to being able to build it. And that's kind of why I got into it in the first place.
Could you have raised money for this in a place other than Silicon Valley?
No. Zero chance. Maybe different parts of the US, maybe. Not outside of America. There's nowhere outside of the States where you could have raised money for it. What was interesting is, so I spent a year convincing myself it was a good idea, and I did. And then I decided to go and raise money to actually start buying the property and doing the studies and doing the work. And the first time I went to raise the money, nobody would invest. And it was the same. It was the same area. It was the same plan. It was the same thing. But because it wasn't, even in Silicon Valley, if you're building a software as a service startup, people know how to look at it. They know that the market is there. They know how to invest in it. They know how to look at the risk. Building a new city, we haven't done that in America in 60 years, basically. There was a generation of them that we did in the 60s. And then there was a big gap, kind of the continuum got broken. And so the first time I went raising money, people said, well, it's a good idea, but what do you know about building new cities? And what do you know about water and transportation and all of that? And I would say, well, I've studied it for 4 years and here's the answers to all of those questions. But obviously their reaction was, well, okay, you've studied it for 4 years, but how do we know that you are right? And how do we know that you can buy the land and so on? I was so convinced that I basically took all the money I had, I put it in, and then I borrowed all the money that anyone would lend me and kind of bet everything. And we used that money to do a bunch of studies to prove all of these assumptions that I had told people about. And then we used that money to buy some of the initial parcels. And so when I came back, it was no longer an idea. It was, hey, we have the following lands that we've acquired or we have it under contract. And we have done all of this work and here are all of these experts. And look, what I told you 5 months ago about it has actually been validated. And they said the same thing that I did. And so on the back of that, we were able to raise, or I was able to raise the first $10 million. There's also this perception that the money just kind of materialized easily. And we raised at this point about $1 billion. And no, it was $10 million, and then it was $5 million, and then it was 5, and then it was 80, and then it was another 40, and then it was another 100. And each of those rounds was extremely difficult to raise. So it could not have happened anywhere outside of America. I think it would be very hard for it to happen outside of Silicon Valley. I think partially what got it over the line was because we were so different from any other company, was just people saw the willingness to kind of put it all on the line and go all in.
Yeah, it's funny how in retrospect we really simplify the narrative.
Yeah.
Like Jan went through, knocked on the doors of Silicon Valley's elite, and then he raised billions later.
Yeah.
You know, you were an overnight 10 years later, and you were an overnight success. And
it's always like that. But I think it's really important to highlight it, right? Because if you don't, then people who are thinking about doing something else that's ambitious have this idea of like, well, it was so easy for the people who did that or who did that, and started this company or that company, and it kind of just happened. And if you don't kind of do what you just did and kind of bring out the fact, no, like this thing could have failed a million times along the way, and it was small incremental wins, and none of them felt like the thing that kind of makes it work, then you make it harder for kind of the next generation of people coming in to do that. There's that famous quote that gets attributed to Picasso or someone, and they talk about when art critics get together, they talk about form and meaning and these abstract concepts, and when artists get together, they talk about where do you buy cheap turpentine, and I think there's a lot of wisdom in that.
And one through line of your journey and what you're describing, it's real perseverance, it's doggedness, and it's not just the doggedness that we talk about in case studies where, J.K. Rowling was rejected by 30 publishing companies before she was accepted. But it's also perseverance against your own mind, where you're having weeks, months, probably years where you are dealing with doubt and questioning, where you're actively surfacing, this is why this thing won't work. And yet you are continually pushing through these internal, external forces. It's like that's so much of the entrepreneurial spirit.
I mean, for me, what really helped make all of that work when I tried to spend that year trying to prove that it wouldn't work. Because what that meant is by the end of it, I was pretty goddamn convinced it would work. Like any possible objection, all of the things that people have brought out in the last year and a half that it's been in the public domain, and people have said, well, it won't work because of this or this or this. Every single one of those things was something that maybe not every single one, but 99% of them was something that I kind of went through 8 years ago. And it was also that thing that, for example, allowed me to raise money. Because I think there's a universal journey that people go on when they think about this idea of we're gonna build a major new city in the Bay Area. The first reaction, at least to a lot of people, not everyone, is that's a great idea. The second reaction is that's a terrible idea because if it was a good idea, we would have done it already. So you go through all of these reasons for why that's a bad idea. And I think that's a similar journey that people have gone on in people who care about housing in California, like the housing advocates. When this came out first, I think that the YIMBY, the Yes in My Backyard movement in California, was relatively split. Some people really got it and some people didn't in the beginning, or they had concerns. But I think what happened over the last year is as they've seen the work come out of us, as they've seen the actual plan, as we've kind of answered questions, people have come around much more on the side of this is a good idea. And I think that's happened locally in Solano County as well. And all of that comes from the initial kind of depth of the thinking and the conviction of you take these problems or challenges with doing this and you actually have good answers. And then you evolve the answers over time and you put more resolution behind them. And now we have a world-class team of planners working on it and water engineers and transportation engineers. And so we can put a lot more resolution on those initial concepts. But I think there's an emotional journey that is very similar for most people as they think about it.
This is something that my co-founder and I talk a lot about, how it's never just the big idea, right? Big ideas are easy. At the end of the day, your and your team's success, it was pairing a big idea with exceptional execution. You've delivered. But that's what makes what you've done so impressive and such a case study, because you picked, again, one of the biggest ideas, but you're delivering against it. And that's building public support, that's building investment, and that's building momentum towards the manifestation of this vision you've had for almost a decade now.
Yeah, and I think there's an interaction between the more challenging and in some sense the bolder the vision of what you're trying to build. That works in both ways, right? It makes it harder, but it also makes it easier to get extremely smart and motivated people to come and work on it and motivate them and get them to. And so you can assemble exceptional talent around building rockets or curing cancer or building a new city or helping people double their income in a different way than if you are building a software company.
But you still hear them try. It's like the new thing.
Absolutely.
We're saving the world. It's like, actually, you're a B2B payment app. I mean, it's okay. It does not everything has to be
that way.
It has to be that way. Yeah.
But I think that's the cards that companies like Merit America or like what we're doing have to play, which is if you are doing something that is kind of fundamentally harder, but maybe more differentiated or different kind of impact on the world, then you can use it to attract a different level of talent that wants to work on it. and that helps to kind of make it and will it into existence. And I think people have done it well in healthcare historically. I think Elon has obviously done it with SpaceX and Tesla. I think the Anduril guys are doing it really well with what they're working on. And I think that playbook hopefully can be applied more broadly. I mean, climate startups have done that very well. Education startups have done that very well over time.
Yeah. You pay a tax for really audacious ideas and that there's more friction, right? They're harder to do, but you get this kind of subsidy from talent.
Exactly.
Right? The bigger the idea, the harder it is, the more that people want to participate and get on board.
Exactly.
I want to go back to something that you said that was just so striking to me and something I didn't realize, that you, at one moment, you were willing to bet it all.
Mm-hmm.
And you spent all your money. You took out some debt, it sounds like, and spent this not even on building the company, but building the proof point, the data that you would need to then sell this first stage, to that first stage. And I also remember reading something that you wrote about how in order to make this successful, we have to tie ourselves to the mast. And I'm wondering how much of developing and again, most importantly, executing on these ideas is leaving yourself no other option but success.
I think a fair amount, but you better be right.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I think it's and again, I knew that if we didn't raise the next 10 million to do the rest of it, all of that money would be wiped.
And it's a long-term investment.
Yeah, a long-term investment. And so it was a big bet. And it was pretty scary at the time.
Do you remember that moment? Do you remember that
Oh yeah,
moment
I remember
deciding?
very well. My wife doesn't let me forget it, that's for sure.
Can you walk us through it? What was that like, making that decision?
I mean, it was over a period of 5 months, I think, in 2017.
Did your wife not want you to do it?
No, she did. She was actually very supportive.
She did. Wow.
She was really supportive. I think in a lot of startups, your spouse is kind of the unofficial co-founder in different ways, and I could not have done it without my wife. There's just no way.
Yeah, taking those types of existential risks, I mean, it requires a partner who is fully on board.
Yeah. And I think, it's the risk part, but it's also just having a sounding board and someone to bounce ideas off and be a kind of a independent advisor who can kind of look at it from a different perspective and who's seen different parts of the company. And it depends a little bit on kind of what your spouse is interested in, and it doesn't work that way for everyone. But my wife happens to be a business genius, and so she's just been great to have along for the ride. And she works with us now as an advisor, and she was very involved in the campaign. But it would have been very difficult to do it without her for the last 8 years.
One thing that we were talking about before we started filming was how surprised I've been by the amount of pushback and criticism that you and California Forever have gotten throughout this journey. Again, despite proposing something that is so needed and clear. And I was struck by people who I felt like don't get it. And I felt some frustration, but then I started reflecting on what that must have been like for you, especially in the moments where you were still developing the idea, you're still deciding, is this something that I want to do, that I want to commit my life to? It's hard to hear criticism. I mean, I'll speak for myself. It's hard for me to hear criticism. I feel like there's this John Mulaney, the comedian, he has this bit, how he's one of my favorite comedians. He talks about how he feels like he's constantly running for mayor of nothing. And I kind of feel like that sometimes, where I just, you feel a disconnect, especially with people you care about. You care about the Solano residents. I know this because of how many investments and how creative you've been about uplifting that community. And yet to feel not only misunderstood, but attacked by folks on the other side. I'm wondering, what is your relationship with criticism, with feeling misunderstood? Does it just not affect you, or are you good at faking it because you come off as so focused and so self-assured and consistent? Yeah,
I mean, it certainly affects me. I mean, if you pour I mean, I poured 7 years of my life into this, right, before we introduced it. I mean, we knew the launch would be controversial. And we knew it because you're proposing a huge change to a community that hasn't seen a lot of change. It's being proposed by a lot of outsiders, and I get that skepticism. And then we had to acquire the property confidentially for 7 years. If you're trying to do a land assembly, of course you don't tell everyone what you're doing. I mean, we already paid on average 4 times market value for the land that we bought. And so we minted 700 millionaires in the process.
Wow.
But
these are millionaires in
Solano County. In Solano County. We minted 700 millionaires in the process who owned lands that was worth X and they sold it to us for 4 times X on average. Wow. But of course, it's confidential and there was speculation that it was someone from China buying. I expected people to be skeptical but open-minded. I did not expect some of the very direct personal attacks and kind of just shutting down the conversation. That's now largely gone. And if we look at what's actually happened in the community over the last 8 months is just broad-based acceptance of the idea. We now have multiple cities who want to approve the project by annexing it. And actually many of them are looking at doing that. I would say a lot of people who might have been against it in the past are now different levels of support. Some of them are neutral. A lot of them are now really, really supporters. I would say there's a minority contingent of people who there's personal attacks and they don't like it and they are protesting it. And that's just the reality of how development works kind of anywhere in California and in the country right now. You always have some of that. And I think it's unfortunate, but it's kind of part of what happens. And I mean, we certainly hope that many of them change their mind. Many of them have already over time. But I would say for the majority of the residents, we now have great relationships. And I think people have really started to see the value in what we are doing. And you can see that in the endorsements from elected officials and community leaders and the process that we're going through right now to approve the project.
It does seem like there's a real shift in public sentiment.
100%.
What was it? What prompted that?
I think one of the mistakes that we made in the beginning is we had political consultants who felt strongly that they wanted to introduce the idea in late 23 and then put it on the ballot in 24 as a ballot initiative. And they felt that 15 months was kind of the optimal time to do it. And I defer to them personally. But that turned out to be the wrong assumption. It was a little bit too fast and people just needed more time to kind of sit with the idea, and you need more time to build relationships and get to know people and kind of, it's such a big idea to some extent, you can't explain it in TV ads. Like there needs to be an element of getting to know people and they need to learn to trust you and you trust them and you build a relationship. And so I think the rollout was too hasty. And what really happened is during the first 6 months of the campaign, what's become clear now is there was no real discussion about the merit of the idea. It was all politics and all posturing. And what really changed in the middle of last year, and then particularly, second half of last year and then this year, is it's just been a much more sensible kind of rational discussion about, well, okay, this is a good idea. We have these concerns. How do we solve them? And so it's been much more of a collaborative process of saying, okay, we see why there's a benefit to this, and our concerns are about transportation and water. And so what are we going to do about that? What are we going to do about this? But I think having more time to work on it is helpful. I think building trust is helpful. People have been burned by developers before, right? I mean, it's a field with a mixed bag of success, and there's definitely firms that come in and they make a bunch of promises and then they don't deliver on them and they leave. And what people have seen from us is the opposite. I mean, we've been there. We've said, hey, we're gonna go and we're gonna open in partnership with a local hospital. We're going to open up clinics, and we actually bought 2 clinics and they are being refurbished right now and they're going to be opened in the next few months. We said, hey, we will work on helping to upskill people for these new jobs that are coming. And we did the partnership with Merit America. And I think people have seen that that's actually happening and people are actually getting better jobs. And so you do things that build trust over time as well.
And again, so much of it's execution.
Yeah, exactly.
We are delivering on the promise.
We are delivering. And in some sense, what happened with us is people projected frustration with the system and kind of even politicians on us. I remember this community meeting that I did in the beginning, and people came in and they're like, well, these developers came in the 80s and they completely screwed us and they made all of these promises. And I had to very respectfully sit there and say, well, respectfully, I wasn't born when that happened. Like a different person. Like I wasn't even in the country here.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think we've built a system where we don't account for what happens if you do nothing. We've built a system that prefers the status quo. Our entire regulatory system in California is designed on the assumption that the status quo is good and we must protect it. And that's failing in multiple ways. For example, our system makes it extremely difficult to build solar farms and wind farms and any kind of clean energy or transmission. And it's actually saying the current system is good when clearly it's not. And similarly, the current system is saying, well, the neighborhood as is good and we need to protect it. Well, we have this idea, and it's been really embedded in California approach to development, that the best way to protect your community and your neighborhood is to change nothing about it. But if you can freeze in place the physical layout of it, but often what that means is the people who live in those houses change. Because if you can't, if you don't build enough housing, then the people who want to move in the neighborhood are going to bid up the prices, whether it's rent or whether it's prices of the homes, and they're going to push the lowest income part of the neighborhood out. And so people talk about gentrification, for example, and what's been proven over and over and over again is if you build new supply, then that's where the new people move in. And the existing residents can stay in their places. But if you don't, then this whole tournament starts of who can afford to live there. And so the whole system we have is just strong preference for status quo, even when status quo clearly isn't working. And that's what we need to fix at the state level and at the local level.
But this is such a common denominator for visionaries, where you are necessarily pushing against the status quo. And the status quo, even if it's so broken, it's so comfortable. It's so familiar.
Yeah.
And what I really appreciate about what you just shared is that it sounds like a big part of manifesting this vision for you has been making the unseen costs of not acting real. How do we articulate what this is? How do we show the cost of inaction that then can propel us to something that might be uncomfortable, but ultimately so much better than what we're in now?
100%. I think it's articulating it and then it's showing it in a human way. In Solano County, a big topic is people's kids are not coming back. They go to college, they go and live in San Francisco or Sacramento or Dallas or New York for a couple of years, and then they were meant to come back and they never do. And it's a combination of lack of employment opportunities and lack of neighborhoods that are maybe more like what younger people might like, where you can walk to a restaurant and you have nightlife and more of that energy that you find in those cities. And that's a real human thing. And what we've, I think, done a good job of is having conversations with people and saying, well, look, you may not want to live in that new town that we are building, but do you think your kids would like to live there? Well, yeah, they would. Well, where do your kids live right now? Nashville. Would you like them to come back? I would. Well, why don't they come back? Well, they say that there's not enough to do here. And so I think showing people the benefits in ways that they can really tangibly understand is part of it as well.
And that has been, I think, such an important part of your success. Boiling down these massive, abstract, and pretty complex plans into people. I'll never forget when we first met and you described the goals of Solano County, that you wanted every kid to be able to walk to school. I believe that was the goal.
In the new town, yeah.
In the new town, town that you're building. And these stories and this framing of an individual person who thinks about their kids, who thinks about their kid walking to school, who thinks about their kids moving away out of their town. These are hitting on core aspects of the human condition that are so much more compelling and evocative and memorable than the fanciest spreadsheet, the most sophisticated financial model. And I think it's the pairing of those two that is so effective. but perhaps even more so leaning into the stories of people. I think that often that's what's left behind, and why a lot of these big plans or pitches don't land with people.
A city, in some sense, is this really interesting, complex organism or ecosystem that's a million things to different people, right? To someone, it's a home, and to someone, it's a place to go and have fun, and to someone, it's a place where they work, and some people really care about the physical layout of it and the opportunities. So, in some sense, it's the most abstract product that you can have, because it's different things to different people. Trivial example. It's a good thing for people who live in Walnut Creek or in Richmond. Why? Well, because right now, all of the people, or half the people who live in Solano County, get in the car at 7 a.m. in the morning and they drive to San Francisco. And they make traffic worse for everyone. It's a really bad lifestyle for people who live in that central part of the Northern California mega region to live, because they spend 3-4 hours in traffic every day. But it also makes life for people who live in Walnut Creek or in Berkeley or in Marine Wars, because we are all sitting on the same highways. So what if we could take jobs that right now we are sending to Texas or Arizona, and we put them in Solano County, so that the people who live in Solano can have a 20-minute commute. And by the way, the people who live in Stockton can have a 20-minute or 30-minute commute to Solano County. And we can make the whole region better. That's not the story that the media wants to write. The media wants to write a story about secretive group of billionaires buying land. And so you have
China's infiltrating Solano.
Exactly. And so you need to find a way to tell that story. And some of it is finding journalists who actually want to write the real story and be more accurate about it. And then some of it is going direct and talking to people at policy levels and locally and community meetings. And over time, that becomes you can communicate the value of it.
There's such an obsession, especially in Silicon Valley, with scale. Is it scalable? Is it efficient? And one thing I'm hearing from you is this messaging communication campaign, it's not scalable. It is customized. You have to go and knock on these doors of these different constituents, and you have to understand what they care about, what is their involvement or their relationship to what you're trying to build, and then you have to talk to them about that thing in a way that is truthful and aligned, but fits into this broader tapestry of the full messaging of the thing, which sounds exhausting, but I don't know how you would do something so complex any other way.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting point, and something that we learned in running the political campaign about middle of last year, kind of halfway through it. And we had shot these actually really wonderful and very convincing ads that we put on TV, and we had these flyers that we got to people, and we had online ads and whatnot. A new city, it's so complex and so complicated, and given the scale of it, it's such a change to how the county would work, that what we learned is everyone had the same 20 questions. And they just needed to get the questions answered. And there was no way you can do it on TV, and you can't do it through a mailer. And so what we started doing was house parties. And we would have members of the team, including myself, and then we hired a broader team of ambassadors, and we would do house parties. And we would have 10 or 20 people at a house party, and a couple of our people would go to them, and we would explain in 15 minutes what we are doing. And then it was always almost the same emotional journey. People would come in and they would ask 20 questions. And they were almost always the same questions. There was some variation, but they were very similar questions. And by the end of it, they got answers, and the answers were delivered by a human, and they liked the human, and they saw that the human was just a person, and they cared about it, and they believed in the project. And by the end of it, most people would say, you know what, that's actually a really good idea. We should do it. And that was it. The fundamental part of why public opinion moved profoundly in favor of this over the last 8 months is we did a few hundred house parties in the middle of last year, second half of last year, going all the way to the end of the year.
Again, so much of entrepreneurship and innovation, it's focused on like, what's the most efficient thing? What's the scalable thing? House parties aren't scalable. I mean, it's so slow. It's so plodding. But when you have a scary, visionary idea, you, by the very nature of the idea, it is something that is against the grain, and you have to appeal to people's hearts and minds. Mm-hmm. And it's hard. It's just hard to do that at scale, especially for something like this, which is so unique because your go-to-market, it's not like you have, oh, this is my demographic of my customer. Yeah. You have 1,000 different customers, mm-hmm. and every one requires such unique hand-holding. And the house party insight, that's very striking to me.
If you're trying to build a city for 400,000 people in California, you can't treat it like you're building a subdivision for 2,000 or a strip mall. It's a big story. Have the big debate. Have the intellectual debate. I remember 8 years ago having a conversation with, I think it was one of the investors probably, and I was talking about how we're going to convey the idea. And I kind of said some version of this where I was like, well, look, like, the county is 450,000 people, and this is a big idea, and we have the resources to explain it. And if it comes to it, and we have to do hundreds of meetings where we just answer these questions, we'll do them. From the very beginning, my view was that given how big the project is, given where it is, given who's involved, this is a big story. It's a big story about California, and it's this microcosm of so many of the forces that are shaping what California is today are embedded in the story, right? It's a story about land use and innovation and investment and housing and advanced manufacturing and energy and how do we make decisions and how do we build again.
And the American dream.
And the American dream. And what does it mean? And what does it mean for Californians to be moving out of the state instead of Americans moving into California? And I wanted to tell the story. And my view was, hey, we're not gonna hide from it. Like, we're not building a subdivision. We're not building a strip mall. This is so big. We should go out and tell the story, and we should say why we're doing it, and we should say who are the people behind it, and we should run it like a big referendum on the future of California, and we should tell this vision of what California used to be and what it could become and what we believe it can become, and why Solano County can play this foundational role in being a place that figures out how to do growth in California in a way that follows the California principles, but also can actually deliver on this idea of the state being a place of opportunity where kids are better off than their parents. And we wanted to have that big debate. I do think we feel this in everything that we're doing right now. There is this really interesting cultural moment in California where people are fed up with the system. And I mean, the fire in the Palisades just showed it, right? The frustration with people who can't rebuild their homes. There is a cultural moment where people are realizing that however we did, regulation just isn't working. And California is no longer the state of opportunity that it used to be, or at least it's at a huge risk of not becoming that or not being that anymore. And I think that there's going to be some pretty big changes in the next few years. And I think we're going to be part of that whole movement. And I think it's going to be pretty exciting.
You are an exceptional visionary, but equally, if not more important, you are an exceptional executor. How have you maintained the bar for exceptional execution throughout this 10 or so year journey with all of these twists and turns? Like very tactically, how have you driven that with your team?
I think I kind of learned the biggest lesson when I was a kid and I played Starcraft.
I loved Starcraft.
I loved Starcraft.
1 or 2? What was your?
I mostly played 1 and then a little bit of 2.
What was your race?
All of them. I kind of alternated.
There was, and for listeners, there's Protoss, there's Zerg, there's Terran, there's a lot of debate. What's your favorite race? But sorry, we'll nerd about this after. Okay, so playing Starcraft.
And I think that the biggest lesson there was just the importance of basically moves per minute. It's just like how quickly could you do stuff? The clicks, the RPM or whatever you would call it. Just like how many physical clicks could you make per minute to coordinate and perfect how it executed. And I kind of apply that a lot to business. I think a lot of it is, yes, there's the long-term vision and the strategy, but it's like physically how much can you get done in a day? And that's the bar that I kind of hold myself to is just how much physical output you can have, because I think it's underestimated. And it doesn't correlate to just doing things. It's not how many Slack messages you responded to, but it's just the physical output every day. And if you can keep it up really high for a long period of time, then it compounds in tremendous ways. And then if you can impart it to the team, and hold people accountable to what did you actually get done today. Not how many meetings you had, not how many emails you sent. What did you get done today?
And so how do you keep up your physical output, your clicks per minute? Do you have a meditation practice? Do you exercise?
Coffee,
just like pure stimulants.
No, I'm very against the grain, and I'm maybe it's my Eastern European origins, but I haven't bought into the meditation and Zen and optimization. It's just sheer brute force of coffee, and it's working so far.
Yeah, and this was so clarifying and inspiring. And again, I just want to thank you for casting a better vision for California and taking us all along in the state along for your journey. I'm so confident that we're going to be better off, and I can't wait to move to Solano in 5 years or so. How much time?
Hopefully before then. I'm excited to do one of these in the new city in a few years.
Okay, great.
We'll do it in 3 or 4 years.
All right, awesome. We will do a podcast episode follow-up in a few years in the new city. Thank you again. And thank you for joining us. We really appreciate you tuning in. Please remember to share, subscribe, heart, like, share with your mom. It means the world to us. And we're excited to see you next time.